We care a lot about issues like Palestine and Syria and, of course, Iraq and the Yemen and Burmese Muslims and so forth. And we want these issues to be treated fairly. But again, it's not just information. In fact, if you wanted to tell the history of Palestine and how Israel was created and the Zionist project, don't expect that you will change anything. Because unless you can change the cognitive frames that have been set in favor of the Zionists and against you, then they won't get it. And we have to understand that. And you can show all kinds of films and give all, but they won't be sympathetic with you. Because they have been taught not to be sympathetic with you because you are such and such and such and such. So this is very important. You've got to get the bull by the horns. And that means that you've got to shift the cognitive frames. And there are many ways to do that. But that's very, very important. Okay? And you must not be surprised that no matter how clear what you say is and how convincing it is to you, they won't get it. They won't get it. And don't think they're evil. And don't think they're stupid, because they're not. They have been programmed with paradigms and cognitive frames. Information never speaks for itself. We say, let the facts speak for themselves. They don't. Facts have to be interpreted. Facts have to be evaluated. And you will do that in terms of the paradigms and cognitive frames that you have. Does that make sense? And again, so also in the quest for knowledge and teaching, we have got to know how the people around us think. And we've got to get to the very basic ideas that they have. And we've got to be able to deal with those ideas. That's a preliminary necessity before you can tell them all the beautiful information you've got, because they won't be able to get it. Don't expect them to get it. You've got to deal with that first. And an example, that I like very much is the whole issue of, did Muslims come to America before Columbus? And actually we have very strong evidence that they did. But don't expect that evidence to work. It would work with you because you haven't bought into that cognitive frame. It will work for an African American as a rule, because he or she has not bought into the cognitive frame. And they are looking and welcoming other ones. But it's not going to work for most of the population. Okay? And let me give you an example. So we know from our historians, that the great kingdom of Mali, in the 13th, 14th, 15th century in West Africa, one of the richest kingdoms in the world, that in the early 14th century, their king sent 2,400 boats across the Atlantic. Okay, this is written in our historical books on the authority of the second king himself. Of course, again, it's like, for you, that's, I hope, interesting. For many people, that would be absurd, the very idea of it, because it flies in the face of everything instilled in us from an early time, that in 1492 Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and that he had 3 little ships, and he was believing that he would not fall off the edge of the earth, and nobody else believed that. So it's like he's the first one to do it. And now you're going to tell me that maybe 200 years before him, Africans sent 2,400 boats across the Atlantic? Okay, this is very problematic, isn't it? Especially because what are the cognitive frames that a lot of white people have in their minds about Africans? They don't know anything about them, and they don't know anything about African civilization, and they don't know anything about the ocean, and they don't know anything about boats. So don't expect this to work if you don't do your homework. And so therefore we have to know, like the Kingdom of Mali, this was a global, it was connected to a grand global economy, which we could talk about all night, of the 13th and 14th century. The Kingdom of Mali was the gold center of the world. And where did they get that gold? Well, they got it from West Africa, yes, which has gold. But many historians have said West Africa is not that rich in gold, that it could account for the tales we are told about Mali. So maybe there was another source. Okay? Or maybe there was another source. And in the Kingdom of Mali, if we don't have the right paradigms and cognitive frames, it's like, this is Africa. Africa. And we're going to think maybe of all these crazy ideas we have of Africa. Okay? But in fact, the Kingdom of Mali, they make pilgrimage. They go to Mecca. They meet the whole world. They go there in caravans. They take lots of money with them. And in the Kingdom of Mali, the little coin they use, because they have lots of gold, but you can't use gold to buy eggs unless you want to buy a whole chicken farm. So they have to have small coin, like pennies. Okay, so what do? They use seashells. Okay, well, that's nice. Then I can just go to the sea and get my own seashells. I'll be a rich man. No. So they get seashells that are very special and unique from the Maldive Islands, which is in the Indian Ocean. Okay, so they are global. You see, and it's like, what? So already you're shifting cognitive frames. Like, you've got to understand that the past is not like you thought it was. We have had a reductionist view of the past which is not authentic. In fact, when, let's say, the king Mansa Kankan, Musa, he makes pilgrimage to Mecca, and he's the one who tells us the story of his brother who sent the boats, and he causes inflation in Cairo for 15 years. He brings so much gold. Okay, but how do you think his soldiers were dressed? Well, they're Africans, right? Maybe they weren't dressed, or they weren't dressed very well. Or maybe they had horns on their heads, or skins, maybe. How were they dressed? Persian brocade. Beautiful Persian brocade. Where did they get it from? Well, Persia. See, you have an international global market, and they're rich. And when you have riches, people come to you. So his soldiers are sharp. They're Africans, beautiful people. They're black. West Africans in particular, usually black, ebony. And they've got brilliant Persian brocade. Okay? So you see, again, it's like you're introducing people to a world not only they didn't know, but what they did know was not adequate to even imagine that world. Okay, so now maybe we can begin to talk. And then why would these Africans, and the king himself goes, why would they want to cross the Atlantic? Gold. Gold. I haven't found texts that say that, although I'm told by a Moroccan scholar that Taghribardi actually says that they said we would get our gold from like South America. And probably they were doing this for a long time. See, again, it's like you've got to now imagine a world very different from the world that you were imagining before. That's all paradigms and cognitive frames. If we go to American history, the First Nations of America, especially in Mexico and places like that, they were people that loved to make terracotta figures. That means clay figures that they fire, they heat, that will last for hundreds of years. And if they made a terracotta of you, it would look like you. They do it so well. And they have thousands of these. That just happens to be part of their culture. Why they did it, I don't really know. Maybe because of their veneration of ancestors, I don't know. But they did it. And when we go into ancient Mexican history, like in the National Museum of Mexico, we discover there terracottas of jet black Africans who are from the period of Mansa Kankan Musa, say 1315, 1325. And one of them who's very famous is very black. He has compound earrings, which I could show you on a slide. And he wears a Mandinka helmet. And we can even tell his profession, that he was a donso. He was a hunter. He would have been one of the leaders of all those warriors. Because the donso knows where the lion is, where the snakes are, where the rivers are safe, where they're dangerous. So he will be the one to guide. And there'll be other donsos with him. So this is proof, isn't it? You've got a historical text, and you've got archaeological evidence. In history, you usually can't do better than that. And we have a great archaeologist named Alexander von Wuthenau, Vonwuthenau, who writes about these terracottas. He does a lot of things. Okay, and he tells us that he would show German graduate students in archaeology these statues and say, these are from Mexico around 1325. What do you think? And they would say, well, they look like Africans, but they cannot be. There were no Africans in America before Columbus. So you see what's happening, right? Cognitive frames. This is, and you have to understand, Imam al-Ghazali talks about that. This is an obstruction. So they can't see that thing for what it is. You've got to remove the obstruction. And don't think they're stupid, and don't think that they are devious. No, they do not have the ability to compute what they see if they can't get rid of the cognitive frames. And then, of course, you've got the sea itself. And we have been taught that, the Europeans learned how to cross this vast water, which was virtually impossible before that. Well, of course, the people who think that way are people that know nothing about the ocean, nothing about ships. They're landlubbers, and they think that it's impossible to go out to sea. Anyone who knew ships in the sea, they'd know that that's not impossible. But in the sea, you have a big secret, and that is equatorial current. The equatorial current is powerful, and it runs along the coast of Africa, southward. And then when you get to what is today the Gambia, which is where the ships would have left from, probably the Gambia River itself, then it shoots across the Atlantic powerfully to Barbados and into the Caribbean and into southern Mexico. So that if you just put a raft into the sea, it will go to America in 50 days or 60 days. See? So again, you've got to, this is the truth. This is a sound cognitive frame, but you've got to teach that too. Then they will know that not only was it possible to cross the sea, but actually, in fact, it was likely to cross the sea. And if you intended to do it, then you could. Okay, so these are just examples, but what I'd like you to understand is that in teaching about fiqh, let's say, for example, or seerah, that the Prophet married Aisha when she was how old? She wasn't even a teenager? Oh my God. Okay, who invented teenagers? Who invented childhood? This is a Western phenomenon of the secular period. And of course, it also reflects the fact that we have different demographies, that we have big populations. We are concerned about having too many people. No traditional society was like that. They are usually made up of villages and tents. Qura, not big cities. This is a modern phenomenon. And so therefore, in all of those societies, whether they were Arabian or whatever they were, you want to produce many children. because you may lose all your male population in the next war. And so therefore, marrying young women was something everybody did because of the fact that it facilitates having children. And they want to have a lot of children. Okay? And that's probably difficult for us to talk about right now. Why? Because of cognitive frames and false universals. It's like, no, this is wrong. Don't even breathe this. Don't even talk about that. So when we talk about fiqh, it's like you've got to tease out these things, and you've got to understand who those people were and what their society was like. No one said anything about that being wrong. Not Abu Bakr, not Aisha herself, not the Jews, not the mushrikeen. And I mean, go back and look, for example, at the dresses of the empresses of Europe, who are wedded to like the emperor of Russia or the emperor of Germany. And you find out that a lot of them are 12-year-olds. Okay, because he wants to have a wife like that who can give him children, hopefully. That will be his lineage and his line. And also there are other things like the fact that, inshallah, she won't conspire against him, and he can raise her and make her loyal to his house. So these are things that we have got to do. Otherwise, communication becomes impossible. Otherwise, it becomes impossible to understand what was happening there. And, your paradigms and cognitive frames that come from living in the 21st century in the modern technological state, these are very different. And that's not to say that they're all wrong. No. But it's like, unless you understand their society and their time and the imperatives of their time, then you're not going to understand what they were doing at all. Let's take another example, of the kind of things that we really need to know. I mean, you know that we're Muslims and we hate dogs, right? And we're afraid of them. And probably if we were to bring a dog in here, there would be chaos and a stampede toward the door. Right? He might touch you. Okay, what was the most common animal in the traditional Islamic city? Even terim. Even in Shafi'i cities, where Shafi'is have the strictest rules about dogs and purity. But the most common animal was the dog. Again, it's like, this is not just cognitive frames, it does pertain to that, but it's also having sound historical knowledge. We don't even know what a traditional Muslim city was like as a rule. So we need to know that. And in the traditional Muslim city, Cairo, Damascus, Istanbul, Tarim, Granada, the most common animal is the street dog. And the street dog is trained. Who does that? Trainers. They're trainers in charge of the street dogs. They train them where to go to the bathroom, not to mess up the streets. They train them to eat the garbage, which is organic garbage. They train them also to eat rats and mice and things like that, or to kill them and take them away. They also train them, to smell and to distinguish when they smell between the smell of fire that is burning to heat the house or cook and fire that is coming from a house burning down. So they will detect the fires. And of course, a thief who comes into the neighborhood at night, he has got to watch out for the dogs because they may attack him. That's also what they're trained to do. They may alert the police that he's there. So Muslims love their dogs. And even Shafi'i scholars, who have, as we said, the strictest regulations regarding dogs, they write about how dogs are so good and they're so necessary. So you see, who shifted our cognitive frames? Again, people who knew nothing about our law, nothing about our tradition, and they take the little they understand about Islam and they blow it up and they make it something else. When the French invade Egypt and Syria, this is really the beginning of the colonial period. Napoleon does that, 1798. He invades Egypt and Syria. And one of the first things he does, his soldiers do, is kill off all the dogs, which the people hated, and they hated him for it. I mean, this is a crime. These animals have a right to live, and we love them. And of course, why does he do that? Well, because it's very difficult for the French to occupy the cities if these dogs are there. Okay? So we have a lot of work to do, but we've got to understand that as beautiful as these books are that we teach, they come from an alien universe today. And therefore, you've got to make that universe, you've got to bring it into clarity. And you've got to know what it was like, how it worked. And then you begin to understand. Islamic societies were there were civilizations of highly skilled labor. The guilds, we had guilds for everything. We were people who believed in beauty. God is beautiful and He loves beauty. Right? Sahih hadith. And that means He doesn't love ugliness. That's why you should make this beautiful as you did. And if it were ugly, if it were, just left the way it was when we came here, that wouldn't be pleasing to God. God loves beauty. And so we were very beautiful people. And what traditional people were not beautiful? We're not the only ones, that's for sure. But everything we did was beauty. And you should learn, how did we plan our cities? And, I'll end with something I talked about this afternoon, and I talked about a little bit in RAS. But I think also one of the things that we have got to do is that we have got to create community among ourselves. And it's not ideological, partisan community. It's not just a word we say. Real community. And this will be essential for us to flourish and to prosper and to help this society that we live in. And so, according to my understanding of Islamic law, which is very limited, okay, but according to my understanding of Islamic law, you can't talk about community if you don't talk about land. And this comes from the laws of Islamic city planning. Okay, so you can't talk about, what is a city without a community, without a place to live? Like you're not real. And of course you have a place to live, but no, if you want to have a community, you have to have land. And, a lot of you are in real estate, and that's a good profession. But even look at the word real estate, Why don't we say land? That is a powerful word. In fact, it is said that the lowest of all metaphysical principles is the ownership of land, the stewardship of land. Like metaphysics begins there. So, and land, see, what a beautiful word that is. Real estate, if you're into it, may you make $1 billion, and you're into land, and buildings, of course, also. And also, in the concept of real estate, the land is never as valuable as that beautiful building on it, is it? But the land's what counts. So you have to have land. And we could almost do dhikr, mentioning that word. It is a blessed word. Okay, and then what kind of land do you have to have? You have to have good land. And what is good land? It's land that you can farm. And you can garden. And you can't do that if it doesn't have water. So, requirement number 1 for community is land. And requirement number 2 is water. In the land or on the land. And that water must be clean. Or you must be able to clean it. Because in Islam, obviously you're going to drink it, it's got to be clean, but in Islamic law, you cannot pollute water. Water has got to be kept clean. And if it is polluted, you've got to clean it up. But it's not just as a religious act. You've got to have water you can drink. And you make that accessible to yourself and to others because you can't own that water. Nobody owns water. So if you have a well, you have to also make sure that people outside have fountains from that well that they can drink from. You have to give that to them, or to the birds as well. But you have to have water, and that water must be enough for you and your family and your community to drink. And then also to water any animals that you have, and then also to water any plants that you grow or crops, and to wash clothes and to do other things in that kind of a priority. This is Islamic law also. The laws of water and water usage. Okay, and then number 3, food. You must be able to produce on that land all the food you need to survive. Doesn't mean that you won't go to the grocery store anymore and you won't bring water in from outside. No, but it means that no matter that if something happens in war or in economic crisis or a depression or a dust bowl or anything like that, and those things do happen, then you and your community will have the water you need under you or right there next to you. So inshallah, you'll be okay. And you may not be able to go to Whole Foods anymore, or Trader Joe's, or the stores you have here in Canada, because the shelves may be empty. That can happen. I hope it doesn't happen, but it can. So now you'll be able to live off of what you have, and it won't be necessarily very enjoyable. You may have the same thing every day, but you'll at least stay alive. And your community would not be legal according to Islamic law if you can't do these things. You see, so that's really important because we live in these beautiful societies. And we want to continue to live in these beautiful societies. But we want to begin to put down self-sustaining roots that will anchor these societies. Because right now, if we take a city like my own, Chicago, in the United States, we depend for 90% of our water, not necessarily the water, but our food, on everything, on markets and on farms and different areas of produce that are outside of the United States even, certainly outside of Illinois. Illinois, which is a rich state, produces no more than 10% of what Chicago eats. And Chicago produces almost nothing. Whereas in the Islamic paradigm, the city should be a garden city. The Islamic city is a garden city. And it's a garden city that has animals in it, like chickens, like sheep, like goats, and these are very good for you, and the law tells you how to live with them and take care of them, and they are good for your garden, and also you can eat them, So this changes everything. And where do we begin with our community? Well, again, if we look at the blessed environmentalists of this time who do so much, and we should ally with them, we should learn from them. But again, their concept is just get off the grid. Leave this disaster behind. And let's go to the mountains, and there we will create a pristine community, and there's nothing wrong with that. You're free to do that. And we'll come and visit you and live with you. But from the perspective of Islamic law, you begin in the city. You begin in the city, in the center of the city, not necessarily in the business district, but maybe like in an area where there's poor people. Like, say, the south side of Chicago or the west side of Chicago, where there are gangs and drugs. No, that's the land you want by Islamic law. Because, again, we are focused on the city. We're focused on the urban center. And we begin in the city. And then you want to find good land, and you can find it. And you want to find water, and often you dig for it, it's there. Whether it's pure or not, well, you have to see. But you will find it. And then you want to grow enough food to sustain you. And if you want to grow more, you can. You could maybe even sell it. And again, traditional Islamic agriculture was very good at this. The first revolution in Islam was an agrarian, agricultural revolution. And today we have permaculture, which is a brilliant science. And we can join these together. And again, if you look at, like, say, in my country, The inner city is often a disaster, and there's a lot of crime there. There's drugs, there's gangs, there's prostitution, there's all sorts of things. A high percentage of African Americans go to prison, and Latinos as well. And when they're released from prison, they're given like maybe $40, put on a bus, sent back to where they came from. They're on parole, so you don't dare leave that place. You break parole, you'll be back in prison. So what's he going to do? Where is he going to turn? What's she going to do? Basically, they're going to go back to where they were. And not only that, he wants to go get a job. And they say, fill out the application. Do you have a prison record? No. And so he gets the job. And then maybe a few weeks later, they say, you're fired. We asked you if you had a prison record, and you said you didn't, and you did. So now he knows that, when you apply for a job, just tell them the truth. And so he goes and applies now, and they say, we'll call you later, Don't you call us, we'll call you, and they never call, because he has a prison record. So he doesn't have a chance. And again, if we were doing our work and focusing on the inner city and building garden cities with permaculture and water able to sustain us, we would have we would have work for them to do, and we would have buildings for them to build. And again, the community is not just going to be an agrarian community. We want to have schools, we want to have therapy, we want to have medicine. And it's not going to be just for Muslims. Everybody's welcome. Okay, but this is a very important idea, and I really would like you to think about it. How are we going to do it? I wish I knew. And I'm thinking about it myself, but maybe you know how we could do this much better than I do. But we need to succeed at this. And again, in the Islamic paradigm, you bring the city to life. You make the city a garden city. Permaculturists have told me outside of Chicago that if we could convince the city of Chicago to do permaculture, to adopt it, within 30 years, assuming that they did do that, Chicago could feed itself. Meaning, again, it could sustain itself. It wouldn't even have to depend on the areas around Chicago. So what would be the effect of that? Cities like Tarim in the Yemen, all they had to import into the city were needles, scissors, and razors. Everything else they produced, self-sufficiency. This is the goal of Islamic law. Why? Because you've got to protect your people. And although we want global markets, and we are the masters of global markets, and our global markets were the richest in history, but you cannot depend for your life on the global market, because sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes it shuts down. So when it shuts down, in a time of war or plague or catastrophe, you can still keep your people alive. And so let's say we do this. The service we would do to the inner city is potentially beyond words. And this would be so good for us. Because, again, to be truly human, you need to be in touch with the earth. And you need to be familiar with animals. And working with animals and plants, this is something that gives you your humanity, gives you virtue. You're not living in this abstract realm anymore. It's a real world. It's very beneficial. It's very therapeutic. And then when you develop the city first and the suburb second, then you take pressure off the countryside. Because the countryside now is not enlisted to feed the city. And now the countryside, can breathe. And, you can have forests, you can have lands. From a permacultural perspective, this is beautiful beyond words. And again, because you invert the paradigm, work from the city out, and do everything possible in the city that you can. And that's also why in Islamic civilization, although we have farmers and we have farmsteads, but usually we don't. We have farming villages, don't we? And look at Pakistan. Look at India. Look at Malaysia. Look at the different parts of the Muslim world. You don't have farmers here and farmers there. You usually have farming villages. Again, it is Islamic law at work. You see, and so you're actually forming a little village. And around it will be the farmland. And it will have in it the water it needs, the land it needs, and it's also a garden village. It's also producing. So this has a very therapeutic effect on the environment itself. And, I really think that we have to think seriously about this. And we could talk about that at great length. A lot of it I talked about this afternoon. And again, how do we do it? It's not going to be easy. I know that. We live in a technological society, the dynamic of which is the opposite of what we want to do. So it's not going to be easy. But, in the RIS, I had the great honor of sitting next to John Ralston Saul, this great Canadian intellectual, and we talked about this. And I was talking about it in the context of the work, The Technological Society and Propaganda, which are two classical works by Jacques Ellul. And really, it's good for you to read those books. They're classics. Like, what is the technological society? We live in the technological society, so it's good for us to understand its dynamic. And then you have also propaganda, because in the technological society, you will have propaganda. The technological society cannot exist without propaganda. And the propaganda is not necessarily a lie. But the propaganda is what is teaching you the cognitive frames that make you an effective member of that technological society. Okay? And the propaganda can't work without the technological society. And, so if you understand that, and I strive to understand it, because we've got to be relevant to our time, then you'll know that this is not going to be easy. In fact, it's going to be very difficult. And I asked him, is this possible? He said, yes. Just like that. Yes. And I said, why? He said, because it's necessary. And may we fulfill this necessity. In the history of West Africa, how did Islam spread in West Africa? It comes there very early, but West Africa is a rich region. Economically rich beyond words. Okay? And it is tribal. It is a tribal society. So to put the markets together there was very difficult. And the earliest Muslims there created a tradition which is called by historians by the Mandinka name Jula. Jula in Mandinka means trader. And they create what is called the Mandinka Trading Cooperative. Or you can call it Mandinka Trading Village. And to me, this is fascinating because, in fact, that's where I got the idea. That maybe we need something like the Mandinka Village. And these Mandinka Trading Cooperatives, because they are cooperatives, they are able to take losses and sustain them. And by sustaining losses, they are able, over hundreds of years, to put together the markets of West Africa, overcoming the tribal barriers through diplomacy, through intermarriage, through gifts. And often the gift you give will be the whole caravan. The king and his princes are very powerful. You've got such beautiful goods. You would like to give that to me, wouldn't you? And you don't dare refuse, not if you want to get home safe. So again, the Mandinka Trading Village, it can sustain that loss. And then over a period of hundreds of years, you have an economic unit which is extremely rich, plugged into the global economy of the Muslim world, which was extremely rich and free. And then out of that you get the empire of Ghana and the empire of Mali that we talked about. It's all based on this economic and cultural imperative. And then Songhai. Okay, so we've got to be looking for solutions, bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. And I believe once we succeed at this, and I don't believe for a minute it will be easy. And I think that, I don't even know if it's possible. I know that all things are possible with God. But I know that if we can succeed at this, and in Canada, you might be more likely to succeed than we might be in the United States. I know people are trying this in Detroit right now. And Detroit's a perfect area for it. There's so much land that is just abandoned in the middle of the city. But the thing is that this is a dynamic in the United States that will pertain to African Americans because they are very common in the inner city. And then the FBI and the CIA and others, COINTELPRO, they're going to be concerned about this. So they may not let you develop it. They may obstruct it in their own ways. Maybe that won't happen, and we should try. But in Canada, you may not have that problem at all. And again, we need to try in other places. But once we have a model, and we know how to do this, and we know what are the problems you face, then we ought to be able to repeat the model. And again, it's not just going to be a farming community. It's going to be an organic community that has in it schools that we like, schools that teach sound cognitive frames, schools that liberate, and it has in it real medicine that cures, and it's got therapy, and it will have a whole way of life Islamically. Okay? And then also it can receive the convert, because like if you look at the Mandinka trading cooperative, that's also one of the functions that it played. That you're a Mandinka or a Bambara or whatever, but what do you do when another Mandinka becomes a Muslim or a Bambara? Or what about a Wolof or a Serer? So you can incorporate them into the village and you can teach them Islam, teach them Arabic and Quran, and then you can also spread your culture. And another even better example of this is the Islamic garrison city, right? So Umar, may God be pleased with him, he establishes garrison cities, not everywhere, but especially in countries like Iraq. So you have Al-Basra, you have Al-Kufa, you have Qayrawan, and elsewhere. The garrison city is a brilliant idea, because there you will be a majority. Okay, and then Imam Ali, karramallahu wajhahu, he will develop the garrison city, which in the days of Umar is basically just a military encampment. But Imam Ali will actually plan them out very carefully. And, again, the mosque was always in the center. It will remain in the center. That's also another thing we can do, is have a mosque in the center of our little community. A beautiful mosque. A wonderfully designed mosque. But then, so Imam Ali is the one who makes the garrison city into a cultural, agricultural center. And Islamic culture and civilization will grow out of that. One last thing I'd like to say, because we're out of time. I love you, and I love what you do, and I love this man, and
We love you too.
and look at what you've done. I mean, this building architecturally is not, the architectural wonder of the 21st century. But you made it beautiful, right? You made it beautiful because it doesn't have to be. You painted it, you put up these beautiful calligraphies with beautiful English calligraphy translating. That's the old Chinese way, Chinese Muslims. So now people know, what does that script mean? They can read it and they can be fascinated at the beauty of it. And look at this beautiful woodwork that you have. And I was just in Ottawa, where they have this beautiful mosque on Beacon Road or Beacon Hill, and all of you know it. I'd never been there before. And it's quite humble, more humble than this place. But yet you walk in and I don't want to leave. I don't want to leave this either. And, it's like you're in a living room. I'm comfortable here. It's a safe space. And of course they have, the coffee shop behind. But what's really important, and I'm sure this is the case here, is that they weave this cultural net or nexus out of what's at hand. In the cultural imperative, to create beautiful culture, you don't need to have a grant of $3 or $4 million. You don't need to have wealthy people. All you need to have is working people who have a sense of beauty and can work with what they have and make it beautiful. The people of Medina in the days of the Prophet ﷺ were very poor. And they built out of mud. And they built out of, date palms. And other things. Don't ever think for a minute that their city was not beautiful. Because, yes, we're building from mud and stone and wood, but still we will make it beautiful. We will make it smell good. We will have, ventilation. And they didn't have money for clothes like you and I have. A lot of them have just a few pieces of cloth that they dress in, but don't think that they look like people in rags. Because they worked on that too. They even named their clothing names. They gave their shirts names. It's part of the Sunnah of the Prophet. So it's part of gratitude. So again, in creating beautiful culture, you always want to work with what you have and make what you have beautiful with the least expenditure. The more that you can do that, the more true it is and authentic. Allahumma waffiqna lima tuhibbuhu wa tardah. وَجَعَلْنَا مِنْ عَبِيدِكَ السُّعَدَى وَأَمِتْنَا عَلَى كَلِمَةِ الْهُدَى عَلِّمْنَا مَا يَنْفَعُنَا وَوَفِّقْنَا لِلْعَمَلِ بِمَا عَلَّمْتَنَا بِهِ وَاجْعَلْ مَا نَحْنُ فِيهِ خالصا مخلصا لوجهك الكريم يا رب العالمين اللهم اجعل تجمعنا هذا تجمعا مرحوما وتفرقنا بعده تفرقا معصوما لا شقيا منا ولا محروما ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. It is so inspiring to see you and to see the incredible work you do, and also to see the brothers and sisters in Ottawa and Montreal. We love them, but you guys are really doing a good job. And you are the cutting edge. And to me, these are historical buildings. May they stay in our community to the day of judgment. And we will build bigger and better. But this is historical. And this is what we call the first effective settlement of the land of Islam, or the community of Muslims in this land. That this will work. This will work. The other things that are not culturally relevant, or that, God forbid, are culturally predatory, they will not work, even if they have grants of millions of dollars. So God bless you in what you do. And mashallah, you come back. I would love to be back here all the time. Pray for me that I can do that. I never avoid visiting you because I don't want to. And it's really uplifting to see that every time I come back, there are more people, more beautiful facilities. But again, always focus on quality, because we are a people of beauty. And fiqh also, the fuqaha, they understood that. Sharia itself is beauty. And, so we have to get back these understandings and apply these understandings, bi'idhnillah, and pray for me. And again, I want to say a few words, forgive me, about the Gambia. I love this country very much, the Gambia, and those of you who know about the news, you know that the Gambia is in great danger right now. Its ruler held an election. He lost the election. He admitted to his loss, and then he thought, hey, wait a minute, what's going to happen to me? And because he's not a good ruler. And he's put a lot of people unjustly in prison, and he's killed a lot of people. And so he said, no, don't accept the elections. So now the United Nations come in, and they say, no, you are going to accept it. And there may be military intervention, and there may be sanctions. So none of this works. It would be so beautiful if he would allow the elected president to take office. That would be the solution, but he's not likely to do that. So I ask you to pray for the Gambia, and in doing that, pray for the whole world. Not just for the Gambia, but please begin with the Gambia. The transition to the new government is supposed to be January the 18th. So I would ask you, please, until January the 18th, pray for those people, and in doing that, pray for yourselves and pray for the whole world. But I would like to ask you, if you're willing to do this, that you try to recite Ya Salam 400 times. And in doing this, you are invoking God by His name, As-Salam, the perfect peace, to bring peace, to bring stability, to remove chaos and fitna. That's what you're doing. Ya salam, ya salam, ya salam. And I would recommend 400 times. You can do less, you can do whatever you want. But with this intention, and then, do Ya Latif 400 times. Ya Latif, that God show us His subtle kindness so that there is no war, so there is no destruction, and so that that beautiful little country, it will not survive. If there is a civil war or a rebellion or intervention of other states, that is the end of the Gambia. And it's surrounded by Senegal. And they're the same people and the same tribes. And then Senegal will also be destabilized. And probably you will begin to have in West Africa the same kind of scenario of bloodshed, rape, destruction that you've seen in Syria, that you've seen in Iraq, that you've seen in so many other Muslim countries. So please, ask your Lord, help these people.